Love is often lauded as an indestructible tie and a power capable of conquering anything. But what happens if that love is based on lies and secrets? In this narrative, a night intended to mark the beginning of a new life together devolves into a nightmare of treachery and violence. Set in a quiet, upmarket neighborhood, this terrible story unfolds behind the walls of what should have been a flawless wedding, where excitement and expectation obscure the dark truths waiting to be exposed. This is the tale of three people, Daniel, Sophia, and Caleb, whose lives are going to be irrevocably altered by the decisions they've made and the secrets they've kept. Welcome to Unseen True Crime Stories HQ. I thank you, my viewers, most especially my subscribers, for your support as we keep improving and bringing daily told and untold true crime stories. Please don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Our narrative revolves on three characters: Sophia, the lovely bride; Daniel, her loving spouse; and Caleb, his closest buddy. Three lives are linked by destiny and friendship. However, a dark reality lurks behind the surface of this close-knit friendship. Daniel and Caleb have a relationship that is much deeper than anybody realizes, one that threatens to ruin everything. On this fateful night, as Daniel stands at the altar, he is torn between the life he is about to commit to with Sophia and the hidden life he has been leading with Caleb, a secret that, if revealed, would demolish everything in its path. Every narrative starts in a location where friendships are created, secrets are maintained, and lives intersect. This narrative starts with a relationship that has been built over years of shared experiences, humor, and unspoken understanding. Daniel and Caleb were more than simply friends. They were confidants and comrades in a world that seemed too huge and daunting to confront alone. From the outside, their relationship seemed to be normal, tight, supportive, and unshakable. But behind the surface, there was something more that neither of them could really admit, much less disclose. Their friendship became deeper over the years. They were inseparable, the kind of friends who could complete one another's sentences and understand each other's thoughts without saying anything. Sophia was immediately embraced within their close-knit group. She observed two guys who loved strongly for one another and was attracted to their connection, which she saw as a proof of Daniel's ability for love and commitment. But she didn't see the times when Daniel and Caleb exchanged a glance, a touch, or a phrase that bore a weight she'd never comprehend. Daniel struggled with anxiousness as the wedding day neared. He really loved Sophia, but there was something more lurking in the shadows for far too long, waiting to be challenged. Caleb could see it too. Daniel's grin no longer reached his eyes, and his laughing appeared forced and hollow. Sophia's contentment made her blissfully unconscious of the tempest simmering just under the surface. However, in order to fully comprehend this narrative, we must return to a period before the engagement, before the wedding preparations, to a point when everything changed. It seemed to be an ordinary night. Daniel and Caleb were alone, as they frequently were, enjoying a peaceful evening after a hard day. But there was something different this time. Something unsaid hovered in the air between them. There had always been tension, an unspoken connection, but they had never dared to cross that line. On this particular night, however, they did. A look lingered a little too long. A hand brushed across a shoulder with more intensity than normal. And then, the border that had kept them secure and kept their relationship simple was broken. The next night was filled with uncertainty, desire, and anxiety. They were no longer simply friends. They had evolved into something more, something they couldn't quite explain and knew they couldn't share. In the days and weeks that followed, they kept their secret deep, concealed from the world and Sophia. However, with each stolen time and covert rendezvous, the weight of their deceit became greater. Daniel was caught between two worlds, the one he had always known, the one he was required to live, and the one he had seen, filled with a love as terrible as it was devouring. Caleb felt the same fear of what they had done, as well as the fear of what would happen if the truth was revealed. As the wedding day approached, the tension between Daniel and Caleb grew too much to ignore. They attempted to behave as if nothing had changed, that their relationship had always been the same. They both knew it wasn't. Daniel's conduct became irregular, with his emotions ranging from delight to despair, enthusiasm to dread. He poured himself into the wedding preparations with zeal, surprising everyone, but those closest to him could see cracks starting to appear. Caleb, on the other hand, seemed to be calm on the surface, but on the inside, he was a whirlwind of emotions, including love, remorse, envy, and an enormous feeling of loss. Sophia was preoccupied with the wedding details, such as the dress, flowers, and guest list. She was full with excitement and anticipation, fantasizing of the new life she was about to start with the guy she loved. She didn't see Daniel's eyes darting off into the distance when he thought no one was looking, or how his hands trembled slightly when he spoke about the future. She couldn't understand why he would occasionally withdraw from her touch, as if he was terrified of something or someone. Then there were the virtually unnoticeable, yet powerful moments between Daniel and Caleb. A gaze lingered just a little too long, a touch resting on a shoulder, a whisper exchanged in the stillness of a busy room. These were short moments, yet they were enough to make anyone who observed them feel uneasy. Caleb, too, was suffering, torn between his feelings for Daniel and his dread of what was next. He knew the wedding would alter everything, that once the vows were exchanged, their relationship, whatever it had been, would come to an end. The closer they got to the wedding, the more tense everything became. Daniel awoke in the middle of the night, soaked in perspiration and with his pulse hammering. He'd lay there, looking at the ceiling, his mind racing with what he was about to do and lose. Caleb was a continuous presence in his life, but there was a gap between them that hadn't been before, caused by dread, remorse, and the awareness that the life they had known was going to be ripped apart. So, with each passing day, the anticipation grew, and the tension between Daniel and Caleb became more terrible. The wedding day loomed on the horizon like a dark and foreboding storm cloud, threatening to ruin all in its path. Daniel was entangled in a web of his own creating, and he knew that no matter what he did or whatever road he took, someone would be injured. He simply wasn't sure how much or how soon. The wedding day, which was supposed to be full of pleasure and celebration, had finally come. Daniel stood at the altar, his pulse racing with a gnawing fear that threatened to engulf him, rather than the expected exhilaration. As he watched Sophia go down the aisle, each stride she took seemed like another nail in the coffin of the life he expected to live. Caleb was standing only a few feet away, serving as Daniel's best man, a post he had held for years in more ways than one. However, today's title seemed heavier than ever before. Daniel's thoughts raced as he uttered his vows, and the words seemed empty in his tongue. He looked to Caleb, who managed a grin, but Daniel could see the sorrow in his eyes, the quiet struggle of seeing the man he loved marry someone else. The ceremony proceeded as planned. Vows were uttered, rings were placed on fingers, and the pair was declared husband and wife. But for Daniel, each phrase and gesture was a painful reminder of the reality he had been concealing and the love he could never publicly declare. The reception was upbeat, but Daniel was everything but. His mind was a whirlpool of ideas and emotions, divided between the life he had just committed to and the profound connection with Caleb that had just lately emerged. Sophia, radiant with joy, was unaware of the tempest simmering within her new husband. But as the night progressed, even she saw Daniel's distance, his false grins, and empty laughing. Caleb, too, was suffering. Every celebratory toast, every grin he gave felt like a sword through his heart. He and Daniel exchanged fleeting, strained looks all night, their common secret looming over them like a black cloud. The day, which was filled with love and excitement for everyone else, served as a bittersweet reminder to Daniel and Caleb of the reality they were frantically attempting to hide. As the reception drew to a close, Daniel's uneasiness became clear. Sophia noted how he seemed confused, his thoughts wandering far away. She attempted to dismiss it as fatigue after the day's events, but something about his mood did not set well with her. Daniel was normally attentive and loving, but now he seemed distant, almost disconnected. Every time she attempted to engage him, his replies were abrupt, and his gaze wandered across the room, as if looking for something or someone. The reality was that Daniel could not stop thinking about Caleb. The affair, a sudden and unexpected event, had left him in distress. The bond between them had grown in the days leading up to the wedding, and now, on what should have been the most joyous day of his life, Daniel was overcome with remorse and bewilderment. He had tried to concentrate on Sophia, to be the husband she deserved. But his thoughts kept returning to Caleb, and the guilt was eating away at him. The weight of his dual existence was getting overwhelming. Daniel became more anxious as the night progressed. He knew he wanted to speak to Caleb about his inner struggle, but he couldn't do it here with Sophia watching. Caleb, meantime, was dealing with his own issues. The romance was short but powerful, a maelstrom of emotions for which neither was prepared. Seeing Daniel with Sophia was more unpleasant than he expected. Every grin, every touch between the newlyweds served as a reminder of what he could never have. Caleb could see the tension in Daniel's eyes and the way he avoided looking at Sophia for too long and kept returning his focus to Caleb across the room. They'd spent weeks concealing their connection, but now, the pressure was too much to take. The tension between them was tangible, visible only to those who knew where to look. As the evening came to an end, Daniel and Sophia retreated to their bridal room. Sophia was still enjoying the day and looked forward to a nice night with her new husband. But Daniel couldn't bring himself to participate. Being intimate with Sophia seemed terrible, like if he was betraying both her and Caleb. He made excuses, claiming that he was tired from the day and that the stress of the wedding had taken its toll. Sophia, although unhappy, accepted his explanation. She kissed him goodbye, trying to be kind, but the germ of doubt had already sprouted in her mind. Daniel lay alongside Sophia, looking at the ceiling, his thoughts racing. He knew he was hurting her and that she deserved more than he could provide, but he couldn't bring himself to pretend. The remorse, the terror, and the love he felt for Caleb were all overwhelming. He couldn't sleep since his thoughts were too noisy and overpowering. After what seemed like hours of tossing and turning, he reached a conclusion. He needed to speak with Caleb to attempt to make sense of the chaos they had made. Maybe if they could communicate, he'd be able to clear his head, find some serenity, and figure out how to go. Unable to sleep, Daniel softly slid out of bed, taking care not to disturb Sophia. The hotel corridors were dark and silent, accentuating the tension inside him. As he moved towards Caleb's room, his heart raced with anxiety rather than eagerness. He needed to speak to Caleb about how they might address the tension that had been growing between them for weeks. The closer he came to the door, the heavier his feet seemed, as if his body was attempting to prevent him from achieving his goal. When he eventually knocked on Caleb's door, there was a lengthy, excruciating delay before it opened. Caleb stood there, his eyes filled with the same agony that Daniel felt. He was just wearing underpants, emphasizing the moment's vulnerability. They didn't need words. They both understood why Daniel was there. Daniel went inside, the door slamming behind him with such finality that his heart sank. They sat down, the air filled with unsaid feelings. Daniel attempted to initiate the discussion, to discuss what had occurred, and to find a way to forward without ruining everything. But the words would not come. The room remained silent, each guy engrossed in his own thoughts, unable to break the tension that existed between them. Daniel finally spoke. He admitted his feelings for Caleb, confessing that he couldn't let go and didn't know how to go with Sophia when his heart still belonged to someone else. He asked Caleb the same question he had been asking himself. What should they do next? But before they could get any answers, the emotions that had been building all night burst. The want to feel anything, to find some kind of relief from the anguish and bewilderment, took over. In a moment of weakness, they succumbed to a long-simmering longing. The affair, which had just began, took place in the darkness of Caleb's chamber. Both guys were completely aware of the dangers, yet they couldn't stop themselves. It was a quick, desperate effort to save what they knew they were going to lose. However, it ended as abruptly as it started, leaving them both with a greater feeling of shame and dread. Daniel drew away, his mind spinning with images of Sophia, the life he had just promised her, and the future that now seemed more unclear than ever. As the truth of what they had done dawned on Daniel, he realized he couldn't return to the bridal room and face Sophia with the weight of what had just transpired crushing down on him. He sat on the side of the bed, head in his hands, trying to figure out where everything had gone wrong. Caleb, too, was deep in contemplation, recognizing they had passed a boundary they could never get back. The night, which had begun so promisingly, had devolved into a nightmare from which there could be no escape. Sophia began to stir in her sleep. She reached for Daniel, but as her palm hit the chilly, empty side of the bed, she sprang awake. Panic came in when she realized he wasn't there. She yelled his name, her voice wavering, but he did not respond. Her pulse raced as she slid out of bed, slipping on her robe to leave the room. The hotel was unnaturally silent, with just her faint footfall echoing across the corridor. As she went, she was seized with fear, her mind racing with possibilities, each more horrific than the one before it. Sophia's intuition led her to Caleb's bedroom. She stopped at the door, a knot growing in her gut as she lifted her hand to knock. She knocked once, but nothing happened. She banged again, harder this time, but nothing happened. Her nervousness increased with each unanswered knock, and her thoughts raced with dread and suspicion. After what seemed like a lifetime, the door cracked open. Caleb stood there, eyes wide with astonishment and shame, wearing only in his underpants. Sophia was taken aback by what she saw. She didn't have to see Daniel to understand what had occurred. The reality that had been lurking in the shadows was suddenly unmistakable and heartbreaking. She had just married a guy she thought she knew, and he had deceived her in the worst manner conceivable. Sophia's world fell apart at that moment. The door creaked open, and Sophia stood motionless in the entryway, her mind fighting to absorb what she was seeing. Caleb stood there in his underpants, guilt written all over his face, while just beyond him, Daniel, her husband of just a few hours, sat on the side of the bed, his face a mask of humiliation and sorrow. The reality that had been nibbling at Sophia's awareness had finally slammed into her with full force. Betrayal, shame, and wrath all flooded through her at once, like a tidal wave of feelings too intense to contain. Sophia's voice quivered as she demanded answers, her words cutting and spiteful. Daniel, desperate and trapped, attempted to explain, but the words stopped in his throat. Caleb, who was similarly horrified, could only watch as the situation became out of control. Sophia's rage bubbled over, her hands trembling as she pointed accusingly at Daniel, her voice becoming louder and more frenzied with each syllable. The treachery stung more than she could have imagined, and with each passing second, the grief became darker and more frightening. Sophia rushed at Daniel out of sheer rage. The room burst in mayhem, with the tension that had been building all night finally breaking. Daniel attempted to pull her back, begging with her to calm down, but his words were unheard. The treachery had broken something within Sophia that could never be restored. Caleb, torn between his feelings for Daniel and his guilt over the affair, could only watch in dread as the conflict erupted, the situation sliding out of hand faster than anyone could prevent. Sophia's emotions overpowered her as the encounter reached its climax. In a fit of wild wrath, she swung the closest item, a hefty ornamental lamp, with all of her might. The room became silent as the lamp struck Daniel's skull, sending him plummeting to the floor. Blood soon pooled around him, and time seemed to stand still for a single second. Caleb raced to Daniel's side, his hands quivering as he attempted to stop the bleeding, but it was too late. The harm had been done, and Daniel's dead eyes looked back at him, the horror of what had occurred seeping in. Sophia remained still, the gravity of her actions gradually registering on her. However, the wrath had not totally faded. In her despair and fury, she went to Caleb and blamed him for everything that had transpired, including the destruction of the life she had just started. The agony, humiliation, and loss all merged in her head, and before she could stop herself, she struck out once again, her hands fueled by a frantic desperation to end the nightmare. Caleb was taken off surprise and barely had time to respond before Sophia's assault hit. The room plunged into chaos as Sophia's anguish and wrath devoured her, the sound of her tears mixing with Caleb's frantic screams, who could see the end coming but was unable to stop it. The second strike knocked Caleb down, causing his body to collapse next to Daniel's. Blood from both guys mixed on the cold, harsh ground. And then there was stillness, a thick, oppressive silence that seemed to mimic the gravity of what had just happened. Sophia stood in the center of the room, her breath coming in jagged gasps, her mind unable to fathom what she had done. The bulb slid from her grasp, clattering to the ground among the two dead corpses that had once been her husband and his closest friend. The magnitude of her actions struck her like a physical blow, bringing the truth of the situation into sharp focus. Sophia went to her knees alongside Daniel, her hands quivering as she reached out to shake him awake, as if he could just stand up and the nightmare would end. But Daniel remained still, his eyes fixed on the ceiling. The dread of what she had done came over her in waves. Her sobbing became louder and more urgent as she realized she couldn't change what had occurred. The guy she had loved, the man she had sworn to spend her life with, had died by her own hand in an overwhelming anger. Caleb lay beside him, face contorted in shock and horror, body motionless and cold. Sophia's mind raced, her thoughts colliding in a frantic effort to find a way out, a means to correct what she had done. She stared around the room, her eyes wild, looking for something to make it all go away. But there was no way out, no way to repair the damage she had caused. The blood on her hands, on the floor, and on the walls seemed all too real and final. Sophia attempted to clean up in despair, feverishly scrubbing at the blood and sobbing against the walls. However, it was ineffective. The blood wouldn't come off, and with each passing instant, the futility of her attempts became clearer. The room, which had once been a site of celebration, had become a site of horror, the remains of a love that had been twisted and fractured beyond recognition. Sophia, exhausted and devastated, sank on the floor alongside Daniel and Caleb, her body quivering with uncontrolled tears. The awareness of what she had done, what she had lost, hung over her like a thick, smothering blanket. She was entirely and utterly alone, with only the echoes of her own acts for company. The weight of her decisions, and the life she had wrecked, pushed down on her, leaving her with only one question. What now? As the first rays of light broke through the curtains, Sophia realized there was no way out of the repercussions of her actions. She wasn't sure whether to leave or submit. But one thing was certain. Her life, which had once been full of hope and love, had been irreversibly altered by a single, horrible night. The night that started with the prospect of a future together has ended in awful horror. What was supposed to be a night of love, commitment, and fresh beginnings turned into one of betrayal, violence, and murder. The wedding, once a symbol of optimism and togetherness, is now in ruins, its pleasure replaced by sadness, and its vows obscured by the dark secrets that tore them apart. The vacant wedding site, now a crime scene, echoes the stillness of lost lives and wrecked futures. Sophia, the bride who had hoped for a life full of love, now sits alone, her tear-stained face a mirror of the great loss and remorse that weighs heavily on her heart. This was a night when love changed to hate, trust went to treachery, and life was taken away by the same hands that had vowed to protect it. As we reflect on the events of the night, we are forced to consider the larger ramifications of this terrible story. Daniel, Caleb, and Sophia were all victims of their circumstances, which included cultural pressures, hidden desires, and secrets they felt they had to conceal. But those secrets, hidden under layers of shame and dread, were the catalysts for their demise. What can this narrative teach us about the human condition? How do we negotiate love, loyalty, and identity in a society where we are often forced to choose between our genuine selves and the roles we are required to play? Wedding bands, once emblems of oneness, are now discarded, shattered images of a partnership that was intended to be but never really was. And there, in the middle of it all, sits Sophia, isolated and alone, confronting the awful repercussions of deeds motivated by grief and wrath. This novel compels us to face the terrible ramifications of betrayal, the weight of secrets, and the ultimate cost of living a life we do not really own. Finally, we are reminded of the devastating implications of treachery in our secret existence. The events of this night serve as a sharp reminder of how swiftly love can turn to hate and how easily the connections of trust may be destroyed by secrets too terrible to bear. As we fade to black, we leave you with one last thought. In a society where the truth is often concealed under layers of deceit, what are the dangers we face by leading a life that is not true to who we are? When those truths are revealed, who pays the ultimate price? This is a narrative of love lost, trust broken, and lives irreparably altered, one that stays long after the last word is uttered, forcing us to consider the choices we make, the lives we live, and the people we choose to be. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel and click the notification bell.